Good morning, everyone. My name is Deana. I'm president of the Rhode Island Mycological Society. We're a group of people that are curious about mushrooms, both growing them and exploring outside to learn about which mushrooms are here in Rhode Island. There are mushrooms that are rare and endangered as well. Animals and other plants sort of get all the attention being at risk for extinction, but there are fungi that are at risk as well. So we're just trying to help to raise awareness about fungi and really just bring mushrooms to everyone. And growing mushrooms is so much fun. So I'm really excited to share this with you today. And this is my colleague Aaron, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Deana. So I'm Aaron Keaton. I've been studying mushrooms for about 5 years now. It kind of started when I was in college up in the Monadnock region of New Hampshire. If anyone is familiar with the region, it's a really beautiful space. So being up there kind of connected me with nature than I had ever previously been, and I decided to study the environment. And through studying the environment, I found an interest in mushrooms. There's so many different types of mushrooms out there that I really just wanted to learn more about them. Down the line, I started growing mushrooms, and that kind of opened up this whole new world of mycology for me. To this day, mushrooms are basically my main focus, and growing them is one of my favorite hobbies. It's really fun. So I'm really glad to be here, and I'm really glad that all of you are perhaps interested in growing mushrooms. When we're growing mushrooms, essentially what we're doing is mimicking a natural process that is happening outdoors in the wild. And so mushrooms are really just the fruiting body or the visible structure of the whole organism. So sometimes I compare it to a tree and the roots. Basically, the mycelium, or the larger organism of the mushroom, is comparable to roots of a tree. So just like we don't tend to see roots, we don't tend to see the whole organism within a mushroom. Most of it is underground or in a log or trees. But the way that the whole process begins is by a spore. And so mushrooms at a mature state like these, they disperse spores into the wind. Those spores travel, and eventually they find a preferred substrate or a place that they can grow and eat. And this is usually soil or decaying logs, something like that. And once the spores land there, they begin to germinate. They extend their hyphae is what it's called. It's basically a thread that extends from the spore. And two hyphae from two different spores will eventually connect and continue to grow these basically threads. And these threads eventually knot up and form a larger network. And this network is what allows the mycelium, or the beginning of the mushroom, to travel across its environment, finding food that it needs to grow. That can also be called colonization. And eventually, once the substrate is colonized, the mushrooms can fruit when the conditions are right. So they need food, they need water, humidity, stuff like that. And eventually the mushrooms, they start pretty small, but they get large pretty quickly. And eventually they will open up. In that case, that's a gilled mushroom. So the spores will be released from the gills, and the process starts all over again. So if we want to grow mushrooms inside our houses, how can we kind of copy or mimic the natural process that is going on outside? No one is outside flicking a switch for it to rain or turning on the lights. Nature just has its own way, and things flow, and the mushrooms find their way. But how can we kind of create the environment for mushrooms to grow in our house? Well, there's a few things that we need to do, and for today's purpose, we've kind of checked off some of these steps to make it easier for you. But if you were to begin growing mushrooms from the start, you would have something like this. In this case, this is wood chips that have been sterilized, so all the bad bacteria that you don't want there is gone, and you would inoculate this block of sawdust with the genetics of a mushroom you want to grow. So basically, if you were to start this process, you would probably get something like this. This is a liquid culture syringe, and inside this syringe is just sterilized water and the mycelium from the type of mushroom you're looking to grow. And so you would have your sterilized sawdust or grain. A lot of people use grain spawn, which is basically, rice or oats or rye. And the same process, you would get a bunch of them, hydrate and sterilize them, take your genetics and put a couple cc's within your block, and eventually it will turn all white like you see here. And this is the mycelium of that mushroom consuming all the food here. At that point, you would want to add it to the substrate, so essentially more space and more food for the mushroom. Today we're going to be using straw. So a lot of people use straw, sometimes manure, sometimes coco coir, many different types of substrates you can use, but essentially you begin the colonization of your grain spawn or wood chips and add it to your substrate. At that point, you've kind of gotten most of the process done. A second colonization period will happen, and this sawdust will eventually become all white like this, and then you're ready to fruit. Once the mushrooms fruit, you get your mushrooms and you harvest them, and then after that, if you choose, you can actually collect those genetics from the mushroom you grow and create your own liquid culture syringes or a spore print so that you can continue to grow mushrooms again and again. So basically that's what we're doing today. You could start the process from the beginning, sterilizing your own grain spawn, but for a beginner course like this, we figured it would be easier to, provide this already colonized clean spawn. When you make this yourself, there is this sterilization process that if you don't do it correctly, this could be growing mold instead of the mycelium that we want. So we already have a clean block. We pasteurize our straw, so it's not a complete sterilization process, but we got rid of, any bad bacteria that we don't want in our straw. And we have a variety of containers that we can use today to do this. Right now I'm just going to use a plastic cup, but you want to be very clean when you're growing mushrooms. Bacteria is the biggest thing that you don't want to happen. You want to keep everything clean as possible, especially since this is already colonized and clean. You don't want to introduce it to any bacteria that, is in the air. So today, when we go out there and set up our kits, we should have already washed our hands, wiped down the space we're using with isopropyl alcohol. Wearing gloves is another good step. The containers are already clean. And basically what we're going to be doing is first opening up our container and adding some straw on the bottom. We're basically going to be doing like a layered method, and this helps the colonized grain continue to grow through the substrate. You also want to check if your straw is at field capacity, which basically means that it's hydrated, but you're not going to see drops of water when you squeeze it. If you were to squeeze it really, really hard, you might get a few drops, but you definitely don't want it to be too wet. And so you basically just go through the process of layering your spawn and your substrate. And you can break up the spawn as you go and just kind of sprinkle it over. And you don't want to fill up the cup completely. You definitely want to leave some space at the top so that eventually the mushrooms could fruit right out of the top. And you always want to cover everything up for your last layer with the substrate. And as you're going, you definitely want to pack it down. It doesn't have to be too hard, but you want everything to come into contact. After that, you're going to put your lid on, and this is essentially going to be going into a colonization period. So the mushrooms have to, again, colonize all the straw and become white like this. So what are some of the things that we need to mimic or trigger for the mushrooms to have the right conditions for growth? Especially oyster mushrooms, which we'll be doing today, can tolerate a wide range of temperatures. They're not too picky, that's why it's a really good beginner mushroom. Some mushrooms need it to be really, really hot, some like it colder, but oyster mushrooms are kind of in that middle where they can kind of tolerate a wide variety of temperatures. 68 to 70 is kind of a sweet spot that you want to aim to hit. Right now it's winter, so probably most of our houses are being heated and are already at 68 degrees, so we don't really need to worry about adding heat or cooling. Our houses should be at a pretty decent temperature for these mushrooms to grow. And then we need to add humidity. So the substrate is hydrated, so the humidity process will be already kind of taken care of with the water that's in the straw, but we definitely want to keep it moist because mushrooms really like moist environments. So the best way to do this is when you have these containers, I recommend getting another larger tote or basically a plastic bin with a lid and putting your containers in that container, and it's called a fruiting chamber. It's where your mushrooms will fruit. And that creates a space where you can kind of control the conditions a little bit more. You could just, put this on a clean space, like on your kitchen counter, and it'll probably do fine. But I do recommend adding that extra container to kind of keep all the humidity in. And it also limits the amount of air that is coming in because air contains bacteria and mold, and we want to avoid that. So if we can have a container that we can clean out first, put the lid on while it's colonizing, that will give us the best chance of avoiding contaminants. Once you have your container in that big tote, at the beginning, when you bring this home today, you want to mist twice a day. It's okay if you miss it once or twice, whatever, but you want to aim for misting twice a day. And misting is essentially just having a spray bottle that you're going to spray the sides of the tote. You don't want to spray directly on this. You want to spray around it or around the container, the tote. And if you have good humidity levels, it's a little hard to see, but this is what it would look like. You're going to actually have water droplets on the sides of your bin. And we want to aim for about 90% humidity at this first stage. You can get a temperature and humidity gauge for pretty cheap at like Home Depot, Lowe's, or Amazon. It's not completely necessary, but it is helpful to know the exact levels you're at. But if you mist twice a day, you're essentially going to get up to around 90, hopefully. And then once 2 to 4 weeks have passed, your jars should look like this again. All the white should have come back, and that would mean this is fully colonized and ready to fruit. When you're ready to fruit, you kind of want to drop the humidity. This can kind of be explained in nature. When mycelium is growing, it's usually growing underground or within a tree, so it doesn't have a lot of fresh air. But once it starts to pin, it's introduced to the atmosphere, so at that point it's getting a lot of more fresh air and the humidity has dropped. So we want to kind of copy this indoors to essentially, help the mushroom know what is going on. And so you can drop your humidity by misting once a day instead of twice, and you're aiming for around 70% humidity at that point. The next trigger for growth is fresh air exchange. So mushrooms, when they're in this colonization period, can accumulate a lot of CO2 or carbon dioxide, but when they start to fruit, they really need fresh air. The best way to do that is to crack open your lids. You can kind of just flip it over and leave it on top. This is a little messed up, but you would essentially just flip it over and leave it on top. And if you had the bigger tote, you would do the same thing, flip over your lid and allow it to be cracked open a little bit. And this will allow fresh air to come in and out, and mushrooms will be able to breathe, because mushrooms really do honestly need to breathe just like us. A secondary trigger that isn't necessary is ambient light. So you don't need grow lights or anything like that, but having your containers by a window or in a room that has a little bit of light for a few hours a day will be perfectly fine. the light just gives them direction to grow and tells them to basically grow towards the light. So that can help a little bit, but not always necessary. You just need a little bit of light for a few hours a day. And as I've said, contamination is the biggest thing that we don't want to happen. We want to only be growing healthy white mycelium, and it is really a very thread-like or veiny structure. That's what you want to see. If you see anything that looks green or any other colors, you know you've started to probably have a bacterial infection. And at that point, you would really want to get rid of your containers. You would want to close them up, bring them outside, and dispose of them, because bacteria spreads very easily. So if you were to start the process over again, you don't want to be opening up these contaminated jars indoors. Sometimes mycelium, the white stuff, can excrete yellow liquid. These are metabolites, those are fine, nothing to worry about. But anything like green or even pink, any weird colors or weird smells, if anything smells like sour or sweet, you want to get rid of it, dispose of it. It's probably contaminated, clean your area and start again. But with the way we've set things up today with already colonized spawn, once spawn or substrate is colonized, it has less of a chance of getting contaminated, because contaminants don't tend to want to eat all this white stuff, they just want the food. So if it's already all white and colonized, we've reduced the contamination levels significantly. Basically, once we go home today, it'll probably be another 2 to 4 weeks before this is all white, and then probably another 2 to 4 weeks for them to actually fruit the mushrooms after you've done all those trigger steps. And at that point, you're going to have mushrooms. You could eat them right away. You could store them in the fridge for up to 5 days. Freezing them or drying them is a great way to do it, like for a long-term storage if you don't want to use them right away. And then I think what is really important is if you end up liking this hobby, or you want to try again, or like have someone else you know try it, take a spore print. A spore print is really easy to do. Oyster mushrooms are basically all cap. They don't really have a stem. So basically you just take one of your caps of the oyster mushroom, lay it down. I like to use aluminum foil. Put it on your foil, cover it with a cup. You can even add a drop of water to the cap to help it release its spores, and after 24 hours you'll have something that looks like this. Oyster mushrooms tend to have white spores, so that's basically what it would look like. And like we talked about earlier, you really only need 2 spores to grow mushrooms, and there's millions if not billions of spores on a spore print. So you could start the process over again, put your spores to grain, put spores to what is known as agar, and grow out your mycelium. There's many options, but it's a good way to make sure that you have the genetics again and again and again. You can always buy more, but it is really cool that if you grow the mushrooms, just make a spore print and then you have the genetics going forward. So that's basically an overview of the process, what you guys kind of need to know. I can take any questions now, or as we start, making the kits. If you have questions, just find me. But that's essentially the process and what you guys need to know.
How do you get the spores from the foil?
That's a good question. So the spores will be all on the foil, and then what I usually do is you just need like a knife or something like that, and you basically just scrape them off. So if you ended up making your own grain spawn or buying more grain, you would just dump the spores into the grain. Another great thing is to get agar dishes, make or buy them. That's essentially like this gel that contains food that the mushrooms can germinate on, so then you have the mycelial growth, and then you would put that agar to grain. Basically what are in liquid cultures that you would buy online is that mycelium in suspended water. So if you were to make your agar dishes, essentially you could just scrape off that mycelium, put it in sterile water, and you have liquid culture syringes, which then go to your grain or your wood chips. We're gonna make these kits in the back room, so whenever you're ready we can meet over there and start.
The last layer should be the straw to help hold in the moisture.
Una vez así bien. Échale un poquito. No, échale esto. Ajá, bien ahí.
And if we don't have a tote at home, we could put a plastic bag over it instead of a tote. Whatever you have just to kind of keep the moisture in.
How many times per day?
Twice a day, ideally. And so in maybe 3 weeks, then it'll start to pin.
Wild birds.
How you doing?
Yeah, good. No, yeah.
Do you have the
Everyone's going to be taking
Oh, so you need the cups. All those. Take those.
Eventually, after that, like 2 to 4 weeks, probably closer to 4, because this is, a decent amount. This will start to be white on top, and then basically, yeah, they're going to be sitting in a bigger plastic container and